just like to start by asking everybody on the panel how they first came across Chantal and her work. Lynda.
In Cannes, obviously in 1975, famous date for the first screening of Jeanne Dielman in the Cannes. After, obviously, it was a phenomenon. After that, I invited her to Edinburgh, and we showed the film in 75. The following year, we had one conference on psychoanalysis in the cinema and another one on the international avant-garde, and invited the film again and Chantal to both events, which sadly she couldn't come to. But it was interesting that there was never a reason not to show it, and always a good reason to show it, as we did also in '79 in the second women's event we did.
Sonia.
So to make a long story short, my mother was a very, very close friend, like a sister to Delphine Seyrig. Delphine Seyrig, as you all know, knew very well Chantal, and Chantal was going through a moment of her life where she needed rest and sleep and calm. And Delphine was thinking, where could she go? And she needs to be in a place where there's life so that she sleeps calmly. And she thought of Joanna, her friend, who had a daughter who just came back from Soviet Union and was practicing a cello all day long, so she was at home. So she said, maybe that's an idea. So she called and she said, would you agree that somebody called Chantal comes and has rest and where you practice in your place? And I said, yes. And so Chantal had really, she was resting, I was practicing, and that's how days were going. And then I was really involved in my work because I was just back from Soviet Union, so I was really obsessed by this working and repeating and searching and trying to understand. And she was sleeping and sometimes opening her eyes. And then one day suddenly I heard almost for the first time her voice, and she said, why do you stop? And that's the beginning of the story. But I think I stop here.
Yeah, we'll hear more later. Adam.
Yes, well, first of all, I should say it was going to be Joanna Hogg and me together, as we were for presenting films in our project that we had together called A Nos Amours, and which goes on, I have to say. But she's finishing a film at the moment. But I first saw an Akerman film in a sort of rather scruffy cinema in Amsterdam, and it was Toute une nuit, and I had no subtitles, and the print was terrible, and people kept coming and going, and I didn't really understand it, and it felt like the coming and going was connecting with the coming and going in the film, but so I was a bit confused, not to mention probably I was receptive, but not in the right way. And so then a few years later, talking with Joanna about what we should be programming, we'd done a lot of film shows with all kinds of rather amazing filmmakers, but we were having trouble with finding women to put on, and it was that would fit our kind of program. So we tried and failed with various people, but then we suddenly thought, Chantal Akerman, we'd both seen Jeanne Dielman, and we sort of thought, but actually it was always there, and we hadn't really it had been there as a fact of life, but not really. So then immediately we'd had that thought, then we thought we have to do a retrospective, which at the time was incredibly difficult. I'm so glad things are going to be marvelous now. And what's more, you're going to see restorations, and it's going to be fantastic for you, I mean, really. But what we showed was what we could find, and with her help, luckily, we could put together a complete retrospective, which I think at the time was unprecedented. And in fact, we were able to supply her with copies of films that she hadn't seen since she made them, because they were so And so there was a lot of chaos at the time. And I have to say, with the Fondation's amazing work, that's now at an end. So my involvement is getting to know her through that. She came over a few times, and then that was a 2-year slow retrospective, mostly at the ICA, but with national dimensions. We released Je tu Hillel on a one-day national release, which at the time we were very proud that 2,600 people came and saw that. And then we put on an exhibition of her installation work, because I want to say she is a great installation artist as well. But the other thing, of course, don't forget her writing, because she started off as a writer and then had an epiphany and saw Pierrot Le Fou and then realized that it was going to be film. But she always started with text, and her books are extraordinary, and you can read really good translations of her writing, or read in French if you feel that way. So that's my engagement with Chantal Akerman, and I'm so pleased and happy to be here today. It feels like a marvelous moment of new profile and joy.
And Céline, how? Yes.
Well, I'm gonna use this good transaction. It's I would say it's through the archives that I really had a passion. I used to work at the programming team at Cinematheque, and then with the COVID, we closed the door of the screening rooms, and I was like programming more contemporary work. So I couldn't work on the collection, so the direction asked us to work on different tasks, and I really wanted the archive, so the production, the archives of the production company Paradise Film, of the production company of Chantal, were already at Cinematheque, and I deeply wanted to work there, and so thanks to the COVID, I could spend time there, and it has been just great to indeed discover the writing, discover all of the material preserved. I knew her films, I loved a few films, but really it was through this work there and the time I spent there. And when we could open the doors again, I said, no, I don't want to go back to programming. I just want to stay with Chantal's work.
And perhaps this is a good time to introduce your clip, which takes us right back to the start when, Chantal's first experience with camera, and a film that you found.
Yeah, so the Cinematheque always has been a space. How do you say that? Safeguard space for Chantal's films. We would preserve them, and then she would also deposit some films. She would also send some film in boxes and from Paris. And there was still some material to inventorize, and I had the good luck to discover the short films that she made to enter the film school in Brussels, Alsace. So she dropped high school, and then she really wanted to go to a film school, but she needed to pass the exam, and so she did during the summer 4 short films. We will show one of them and just 1 minute of another one. Two of the films are made in Brussels, and 2 other on the Belgian coast in Knock. And so it was in a box that there were some documents, a lot of stuff, but then the 4 small reels, and it was really like a discovery, because Saute-Maville always seemed to be like the matricial, the big first film, and so we discovered that, and we just digitized them, and I showed them to Sylviane, and she said, "Oh, here are the films." She knew about them, and she was eager to find them. But so, yeah, now they are.
Great. Well, let's watch the clips.
Yeah.
don't know if you can give us a little bit of context.
Yes. So on the second clip, what is amazing is that this is actually the court of the headquarters of Cinematheque and the Foundation. So it's just a coincidence that Cinematheque moved his office, I would say, like 20 years ago. It's close to the Musée du Cinéma, where Chantal used to go a lot with Marilyn Watley, who was her friend and a producer. They formed together the Paradise Film Company in order to direct Jeanne Dielman. And you see Marilyn on the screen. You see her both in the first clip and in the second. And so maybe I can say just a word about the link between Cinematheque and Chantal. So she was a big cinephile, dropping school around 16, 17 years old and going a lot to the film archive. And then she received support from the directions, from different directions of the institution. Jacques Ledoux, the first conservator, they had a great and tender relation. And then with the other directors, she also had great support, both as a filmmaker. She helped Cinematheque as well. She was member of the board. And she started the restoration there. She started in 2013 with Hôtel Monterey, and she also wanted to have, she had the wish to have a foundation, and so she wanted to see her work perpetuate and passed on. And she spoke already with Cinematheque about having a foundation, so she left a bit early to see it, but so Sylviane Akerman materialized this desire. And so we kept restoring the film, we preserved the archives, and we support all of the initiatives that are happening everywhere. Exhibitions, publication. I don't know if you were aware of the exhibition that was in Brussels and then Jetboom and then which travel. It's an exhibition containing a lot of archives for the first time. Before it was just the installation, but now it includes films, archives, and installation.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't know if other people have thoughts about that. So when I see these films, they're just so fascinating to see a kind of some of the themes and that would go on to be developed in her later work.
The shoes?
Yeah, the shoes. Yeah, the shopping. It's yeah. I don't know if you mean
the
it's
shoes.
Really interesting. Yeah, and the sort of fluency.
And dancing.
The dancing. Yeah.
I thought about Toute une nuit, or they don't move, they dance.
And the fluency with which she films herself, she seems very comfortable and quite charismatic in front of the camera. Perhaps we move on to talking about Edinburgh, and I don't know if we can have these slides that I have dug out. Here we go. So this is actually a poster for the Underground Film Festival first, which happened here at the BFI in the 70s. And on the right, we have a letter that Chantal wrote to Dear Mister, which actually was Simon Field and David Curtis who ran the Underground Film Festival here at the BFI. And the letter, she wrote to them to ask them to show Hotel Monterey, her first feature film, which she'd made in New York, and also La Chambre. But I just sort of wanted to show it because I thought it was quite important to know that these works were sort of shown here as well, and to see that legacy. And also because I love the way that she also signs off the letter. I don't know how to finish a letter in English. I just think it's really nice that even there you get a sort of sense of her voice too. So yes, they were shown here in, Hotel Monterey was definitely shown here in 1973. And if we can just have the next slide. These are some pictures that I hastily took in the library last week. But yes, bringing us on to Lynda and just giving a little bit of context to, I think this is from 1975 and 1976, where you see Jeanne Dielman shown sort of twice, just to be able to see the context there, which is really nice. Yes, I don't know if you want to introduce your clip from Jeanne Dielman.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps I could just say that the reason we were also excited by seeing Jeanne Dielman was that we, with the late Claire Johnson and Laura Mulvey, we'd run the first European Women's Film Festival in 1972. And the big issue was that it was to focus on films made by women. And what we were really interested in was not just films made by women or about women, but what we wondered was, is there a new cinema possible that would be completely different? And I was just thinking how to introduce Jeanne Dielman. You say 3 days in the life of a housewife, a petit bourgeois housewife in Brussels. But this is an epic. I mean, this is a film that actually changed the history of cinema. And there's a sort of paradox when you think it sounds like a banal story, but it's anything but. And you'll see from the clip that the way every scene is a single shot. Camera's quite low, not Ozu low, but lower than most people. Static. It's just I don't know, I just love seeing this. I can watch it endlessly. And initially people said nothing happens. Actually, I think it's action-packed. There's so much going on in it. So this is the preparation of a Wiener Schnitzel. I could have chosen the meatloaf, but I thought the Wiener Schnitzel was offered slightly more. So, shall we?
Let's have the Wiener Schnitzel.
Chantal used to say was that, you know, sometimes people watch something and they say we weren't conscious of time. That was the last thing in the world she wanted. She wanted the audience to be aware of time. And that's the kind of, also that's the area where I think her work has been most influential in terms of other directors, like Todd Haynes, Gus Van Sant, Jeanne Dielman. You know, it's all this different consciousness of time.
And when you watched it, were you conscious that you were watching something that was very groundbreaking, or was it a sort of gradual realization afterwards?
I think it's a sort of mixture of both. It was so unlike anything any of us had ever seen. But I do find it is a film that I think it's great to see again and again, and it offers riches you can't imagine.
What are some of the sort of things that you notice when you watch it a sort of second or a third time, or many more times?
Well, it's actually got this thriller element. I mean, when you've seen it quite often, basically the 3 days follow a set of ritual routines, and things begin to fall apart. She loses a button. The tureen, she doesn't put the lid back on the tureen. And you get this gradual sense that this woman's life, which has been completely dominated by ritual, the routines, I think, keep emotion at bay. And then you gradually see things begin to disintegrate until the finale.
And sort of, can you tell us a bit about the sort of film culture in the sort of 1970s and sort of where this kind of came in? Because I was looking at a lot of the reviews of Edinburgh at the time, and they're picking out, say, your Scorsese focus around that time. I think Sight and Sound, we did run a big piece about Jeanne Dielman, and obviously she was, it did make quite a stir, but it was a very different place in the 70s, I think, to where we are today.
Well, I think one of the things she did was she sort of fused two completely different areas of cinema. I mean, when she was in New York, which was 2 years when she was very young, the New York film scene was very vibrant. She was adopted by Jonas Mekas and the anthology. At that time, Michael Snow had been very active for 5 or 6 years. La Région Centrale, his second major, that was 3 hours long. She'd seen the work of Yvonne Rainer, so she knew that side of the avant-garde. And obviously she was very familiar with, the work of people like Godard. But nobody else had actually fused these sort of two different traditions together. I mean, that in '76, when we showed Jeanne Dielman, we were showing Michael Snow's Rameau's Nephew, which is 5 hours, I think, and the Sami Bon Rainer, John Jost. But she did something no one else had done, which was to, introduce narrative, but in a completely different way from what someone had done before.
I always like I think she said that she liked films that were made she liked films that were made like homemade cooking, which I thought was a really nice description given the sort of scene that we've just watched. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on Jeanne Dielman watching that clip now.
Do you mind if I just thought it's interesting that you mentioned cooking, because when I first came across the film, I mean, what I thought it was so right and so completely, I took it completely for granted immediately, because I could remember as a child watching my mother cook and knit with enormous fascination. And these were kind of repetitive gestures, which, you could look at them from the point of view of ritual and repetition. But I saw what I saw as a child in my mother was the endless kind of variation and detail. So the accelerando of her knitting and decelerando, the way she would kind of be counting kind of sub-vocally. And I used to love the rhythm of the sound. And then when I learned to cook from my mother, and she would demonstrate recipes repeatedly. And I loved the details of things like reusing the tin foil. My mother was reusing tin foil. No piece of tin foil was ever used less than about 20 times. And So what I'd see in Dielman is possibly what I immediately recognised as a really obvious thing that I think was extraordinary and blinding to me was, so you can actually film all these things and these amazingly complex patterns performed. And I think, you could easily see it as a kind of imprisonment. But I also, when I saw the film first, I saw also her invention and the way, the flourishes, the little gestures, the way she doesn't just close a door, she'll flick it in a particular way, or the way she, the way she wipes away the flour, or the way she spreads the flour and the breadcrumbs. And it's like an Agnes Martin grid. If you stand back, it looks completely uniform, made by a machine. But you go close and you see it's hand drawn, and you begin to see the amazing kind of presence of the human hand. Now, I know there's a whole other ways of looking at it, but that's what I was really responding to. And it's her ability to sort of actually say, well, I'm going to look and take notice. And she said with that film, it was made out of love for her mother and her aunts. And it was that, I imagine her as a child watching her mother and aunts preparing schnitzel. And one slight sad thing about the film, which I did kind of, the thought that floated up when I was watching it was, of course, she learned her gestures and these recipes from her mother. And then she's got a son who's very good at reciting Baudelaire very woodenly, but he certainly hasn't watched any cooking, and he'll never know how to cook schnitzel, and that's his tragedy. And so I kind of think, hooray for this foregrounding of human life, rather than a constant attempt to kind of portray something else.
Yeah, something oppressive. It's not necessarily always oppressive, the domestic, yes.
Hearing you, I think it brings me to talk about Delphine Seyrig and Chantal in the film, because it's really incredible, I think, because first of all, how Delphine Seyrig, who was the actress we know at that moment, how she had the genius to see in Chantal and to go and do that film. And it wasn't like Ninochka or a film like that. It was the scenario that she read. And Chantal, how Chantal could imagine that Delphine would do that. And what I see, knowing the gestures of both and knowing quite well both, and what I see more and more with the time, because I couldn't see it before, but with the thinking and re-looking, it's that they were visionaries, both, des visionnaires, but they were seeing something else. And they meet in the film, because Delphine was much more, she was working more in a psychological way. She worked with Strasberg, and you have to understand the text and understand why. And Chantal wanted everything but not to understand. She was like, the Bible says, do, you'll understand after. And Delphine would say, I want to understand so I can do. And Chantal, with her little experience and this, she would say to Delphine, Delphine would say, why Chantal? And Chantal would answer, because. Because it has to be like that. And she didn't want to she didn't know more than, it was like a language, those gestures. And what I see in Delphine is that there's still something she does that is a little thing that she adds to the nothing. And it makes it be nothing. So I don't know if I'm clear, but somebody else would do that. You would never feel what you describe. This thing that makes it completely, that you notice something more each time you see it. Even when the film goes on, you notice more and more things. And so I think la rencontre between those two is something absolutely unbelievable.
I mean, amazing that she's 24 when she makes this film, and she has the sort of strength of vision and personality to sort of say that to someone who is a sort of titan of European art house cinema at the time.
And how Delphine decided to to let everything she thought and just to go with her like that.
Yeah.
It's astonishing. I mean, Delphine Seyrig at that point was, one of the major actresses in Europe, and she worked with René. She worked with. It was astonishing that Chantal somehow could persuade her on the basis of very little work she'd have done already.
Yeah, but the film that Delphine saw and touched her.
And she's fantastic.
Very few actresses or actors today who could do something like that. I think I want to say to Delphine, just thank you, because it's an example for us all, just to drop about all the career questions and say, I feel something, I go.
Yeah, and to work with someone younger who...
And to be the way she is with this, like, become Chantal's mother. I think it's so strong.
And very brave for her at that time, because she was very glamorous, and this is not a...
But Chantal used to say, you see, Delphine, you were right to do the film. And now she would... I'm sure they're talking about that now.
Yeah. But it's interesting the way that, she has this sort of expressionless acting, but you sense the volume of repressed emotion under this.
Yes.
But she never changes it.
And Delphine obviously stayed an important figure in her life and would go on to be in Golden 80s, which is another genre
sort
character.
of a return to Jeanne Dielman, but years after. And well, they were all the time in. They had common fights, and Chantal filmed Delphine saying a text. They had adventures all the time, and also they disagreed some questions, but always close.
You're showing Autour de Jeanne Dielman, aren't you? The documentary, the making of.
Yes, which is great to see behind the scenes.
You
and
can
to
see
hear the
some
conversations
good interactions
between the two. Yes.
Quite testy, some of it, but brilliant.
Yeah.
Do watch that.
Yeah. We'll move on to the next clip now, which is one that I've picked, which is a film that I wasn't aware of, wasn't familiar with before I started on curating this retrospective. It's called The 80s, and it's a film that Chantal made in order to make Golden 80s, her musical that stars Delphine in the Jeanne role again. The reason I wanted to show it was because it sort of takes place in a part of her life and work where her filmmaking was changing, and she was starting to introduce music. And obviously with this film, she was trying to find funding for her musical, so she sort of felt the need to make a film to prove that she could make a musical. But what I love about this film is, in fact, it's a lot more than a making of film, and it's a sort of very interesting document that sort of shows you kind of behind the scenes of this musical being made. It starts off with sort of screen tests and auditions, and gradually you see the sort of musical progress. But you also see her attention paid to gestures in the dancing. And so we'll see a short clip from that now, please. It's sort of shot on videotape parts of it, so it is quite grainy.
maintenant tout est fini. Je l'avais dit, je le sentais. Je me voyais déjà serré très fort contre mon corps. Des enfants bruns aux grands yeux doux dans le magasin de la Toison d'Or. Lily et lui, y a rien à faire, sont l'un à l'autre. Mais si l'amour arrivait, me disait laisse la Toison d'Or, moi aussi je partirais, je laisserais tout, je brûlerais tout. Nu dans la rue je m'éloignerais, je m'en irais jusqu'à Moscou. Je perdrais le nord de la Toison d'Or, puisque l'amour est plus fort que tout.
And in case you didn't see, that was Chantal Akerman with her back to us conducting. And I just think that really shows her love of music. Sonia, I don't know if you can talk a little bit about how she sort of, how her relationship to music and blossomed in the 80s, around the time that you met her.
Oh, it's about the same time. I would say that the music, the sound was always in her work since the very beginning, and we saw the shoes in the film you showed, and here is the sound of the shoes. It was already there, and in so many, for example, in Toute une nuit, does somebody remember of the first sound of Toute une nuit? It's like an electronic, extraordinary, beautiful and hypnotisant sound that she found, I don't know where, but so the sound was there. What she didn't know about was more the music or classical music, let's say. And so I go back to what I was saying. I think Chantal being with me, and then the story is that she, in fact, never left. We kept on like that until the end, and she heard me work, and so she didn't enter in the music like, oh, I heard that piece is so beautiful, or I like the sound of the cello, I want to discover. It was because I was repeating, trying to find something. And Chantal always said, as you said, for me the most important is the time, and she said la répétition, because when you repeat, you begin to see something, to understand something that will come or came, that you lose, that you find again, and it's all about music. So I began to, because when she began to speak, she said, why do you stop? I began to explain, and then what I had studied in Soviet Union, the art of the interpretation, why we repeat, all those things. She was fascinated, and it's as if the music came from inside, and then it entered in her films like almost a personnage, somebody of her films, or a voice of her films, and not from outside coming in the film. And I think that's why we did that so long journey where first she took bits and it's in Letters Home. Mm-hmm. She puts all sorts of cello works that she heard me work. This was the first try. And then there was the Dutilleux that she liked and that she filmed in Isabel Stevens. Yes, sometime I'm wrong in the order. But the first time where she asked me really clearly to work on the music of the film was for Histoires d'Amérique. Mm-hmm. And she said, this is the film, what could you add the cello as a voice?
And another thing we should talk about is obviously her work with Aurore Clément, who, again, she has a very close partnership with her, a bit like with Delphine. And, Aurore often sort of stands in for her almost as a character. So Le Rendez-vous d'Anna, I suppose, is a film of hers from the 1970s that sort of maybe got a little bit neglected in the shadow of Jeanne Dielman.
I think the problem was the impact of Jeanne Dielman was so extraordinary. And it's a bit like Dylan. People wanted her to do the same again. They wanted another Jeanne Dielman. I mean, I love Les Rendez-vous de Chantal. I think it's a fantastic film, but it wasn't what people were expecting.
No, not at all. And I think that's definitely the case in the 80s as well, when she starts, she makes a musical. It wasn't what people were expecting.
Well, I think all her life it wasn't what people were expecting, because that's what she was. And now everybody wants to discover all Chantal, but when it's done, people, because somebody who has such a, let's say, genius, maybe it's not the word, but is unexpected. That's what it is.
Genius.
So yes, but it's so used that, and so we have to be ready to where she's gonna come like this and bring something else and exactly the opposite. For example, I remember how she was against the fact that something too lyric in a film given by the music was really a mistake. So almost a commandment. You shouldn't put something too lyric, because then it's the music who gives the emotion. And then I was struck in the film De l'autre côté, when she tells the story of this woman who disappeared at the border. She decided to put it's not my idea. She took Monteverdi, the transcription I've done of Monteverdi with two cellos, with the most heartbreaking music, and she put it just there. So she was always inventing and changing forms, and so I suppose, people, and of course she herself had, after Jeanne Dielman, it was difficult for herself because something so big came out of her that she had to find and to make the la roue tourner again, the turn of, how to say, la roue, to make it go again, the creation process that is going like that. She had to put it back in movement, and I think it was really hard years.
I think it's quite a nice segue to your clip, which is from Histoires d'Amérique, because again, she kind of reinvents herself with this. It's narrative, but in quite a different way. But it also has some similarities, I think, to Lettres d'une cinéaste, in that it's a direct address, and you were very involved in the music in this. I don't know if you want to say anything before people see the clip.
Yes. Well, the part we will see, I think it's it's like a place where many things come together. It's the poetry of Chantal, her way of speaking, and she speaks about, and this joins the image that also is like, moves like music, and her words are like music, and the image, and it's just one thing that takes you in her arms. I feel in her arms when I see that. I feel that she keeps me like that with her voice saying the story, and the story that you will hear talks about time and repeats itself all the time. So there's time and repetition, the two things of Chantal. And about the film Histoires d'Amérique, that I think is one of my love the film, I think is also very interesting to watch the beginning, where she began to think about a film about that with the adaptation of Singer. And usually, maybe a bit quickly, people say she didn't have the money and couldn't do it. And I think, of course, she didn't have the money, but I think something else was going. And probably it's the time she needed to find how she would talk about the Jewishness, those stories, that presence, that's so particular thing that's so difficult to talk about. And she had to do that gesture, how she explains it about Proust, but how she has to take the subject and bring it to her really closely, intimately, and then to give it back. And and when I see or think about Histoires d'Amérique, I think how she did that, and I think she did it through the letters. Look how letters were important to her, and what even you showed. See how the letter says a lot about her, and letters home, letter in Jeanne Dielman when they read letters all the time, and Histoires d'Amérique is built on letters. So I think she needed all those years to take that and to bring it to this incredible film that is like theater, but not theater, completely an invention where people exist in a way so profoundly and emotionally there. Sometimes she used to say that those people were like ghosts coming back, but I wouldn't say that ghosts, because they are so alive and they speak about things that we all have in hands or in heart today.
Right. Let's see the clip.
A rabbi always passed through a village to get to the forest, and there, at the foot of a tree, and it was always the same one, he began to pray, and God heard him. His son too always passed through the same village to get to the forest, but he could not remember where the tree was. So he prayed at the foot of any old tree, and God heard him. His grandson did not know where the tree was, nor the forest, so he went to pray in the village, and God heard him. His great-grandson did not know where the tree was, nor the forest, not even the village, but he still knew the words of the prayer, so he prayed in his house, and God heard him. His great-grandson did not know where the tree, nor the forest, nor the village were, not even the words of the prayer, but he still knew the story, so he told it to his children, and God heard him.
Perhaps we can give people a little bit of a sense of the rest of the film too. So, if you want to describe it.
Chantal wrote. She wrote the script inspired by a book called Bentel Brief, where Jews escaping Europe arrived to this America and were lost and asked questions. How could I? And telling their stories and asking help. And Chantal took those letters and rewrote them, worked on them, and then she added stories, little phrases, jokes, some that I had brought from Moscow, because it's often very close, this kind of humor, the Jewish, Russian, Eastern Europe humor. And she found this incredible place under this bridge, Williamsburg Bridge, and decided to shoot at night and to have actors that she had chosen, who sometimes played almost their own, as if they were saying their own life, their own role. Some others more playing a role. And with them all she worked, and it's like they're outside at night, and there are tables, and they say, they face you and tell their stories. And so I made a research on Jewish liturgic music, and worked a lot on the Chazan way of singing, that is, and the voice is very close to the cello, and that's through that work I came in the film with the voice of the cello to be with them, to sometimes play with, to be in between, to just like this, I would say, and with this very particular repertoire of the same that the Hasidism, there's the same movement in the music, so moments of dance and moments of prayer. And that's what I did on the film with Chantal.
Can you tell us a little bit about sort of the detail of how you work together? Because you went on to sort of write some of the music for A Couch in New York, which is her romantic comedy that's kind of a bit like a sort of Ernst Lubitsch film. It's absolutely fantastic if, you know, people here are looking for a sort of odd film to sort of check out that they, you know, you sort of think you know Chantal Akerman, but with this film, you know, she really surprises you again with Juliette Binoche and William Hurt. Yeah, sort of how did your sort of collaboration kind of change over the years?
Oh,
yeah.
Because it touched many different situations. For example, each is different. For example, The Couch in New York, I had to really compose something where the cello, la batterie, the things I brought in the film were like, I would say, a question of lighting. Not the form, because nothing would make the form go this way or this way, because the music, that's the difficulty. Chantal was quite obsessed by the form and where was the climax, and when you add that, you lose this and this balance that she was very aware of. And the music, especially the cello, can make that sink almost, I would say. And so I understood that, for example, A Couch in New York, I had to bring that, something closer to the light, I would say, something that's like this. And Histoires d'Amérique, I said a lot about it, it's much more a voice. Then we did some things like D'Est en Musique, where we worked on a live performance with the images of D'Est and a pianist and myself behind the void, where the music says probably, but in D'Est you don't hear people talk, and the music in a way sort of says what they don't say. And this, she liked that work also, and she worked on the lighting, so that was more the live, because she really liked a lot the idea of live performance. She liked to be nervous, to read, and then to, it's done. And so she loved to do the lighting of them and to follow and to... Then also she would just come and take whatever she was interested by, Monteverdi, the genre, and come say, oh, give me that, and she would try herself. That was also... And well, there are many different... it was all the time, and through Russia also. She wrote a scenario about, well, something that takes place in Russia related to Akhmatova. And so it would be too long to go in each film, but each situation was different, but linked in a way, because it was very close. All those questions of what is the form of something, what we mentioned.
And I mean, she said film should be a physical experience. That was her view, that, you know, you should really feel the experience of watching a film in your body. And I think she also said that, you know, for her, sort of sound and music is the sort of ultimate physical experience. So I thought that was interesting, that there was this kind of correlation between the two in her mind about, you know, how close they were kind of as partners.
Yes, I think it's the fact, the interpretation. For example, on A Couch in New York, we put a Prokofiev sonata. And it was very expensive to have Richter play it. So we tried another interpreter. And after just 5 seconds, she said, it doesn't work. She was absolutely, you know, what the interpreter gave, she catched immediately. And so how this can happen, she was interested by that. And that's how the music was in her universe, I would say.
I think there is a slight, you know, we are living in this historical moment where there's that interesting kind of twin currents. One is an affection for the material kind of decaying kind of film print, which sort of wears its time and age visibly. And then there's, on the other hand, a kind of generation who've never really seen film originated. They're used to seeing digital pictures which look the same every time. And so the idea of wear and tear doesn't really apply. And of course, we're reassessing Chantal Akerman's work now with these, and there will be a new generation for it, and they will have their own reception of it. And one of the great pleasures of film culture is that it may seem superficially like, the repeated showing of mechanically reliable reproduction, but in reality, the whole thing is in flux. And I think that, I think Chantal Akerman herself was quite, she wasn't a purist in the slightest. She didn't mind. I mean, her later work shot on iPhone, on Blackberries and camcorders. I mean, in a way, she took to that medium and then produced some of her most astonishing and searing work. No Home Movie, which she shot entirely herself on a camcorder, is unbearably poignant and wonderful. And you saw the clips from les années 80. I mean that's have you ever seen such bad quality pictures? But I don't think it isn't getting in the way of what you're receiving. And I did want to just, if there's a minute, just to say another aspect of Akerman that I think is really worth saying, and why the whole body of work is worth attending to in its entirety, and go and see everything, because it is all really good. It's her ability to listen and to enter into a rapport with her subject. And so the documentaries are extraordinary because of her ability to listen in a sustained way. Dis-moi, which is a documentary about some elderly women survivors, camp survivors, perhaps stand-ins, because she's having a conversation with them she can't with her mother. But if you watch that, she's in the frame, sitting at the table, listening in a way that only a psychoanalyst would listen normally. And it's that listening and her attentiveness and her ability to see what others don't see, and her putting it on screen for us. And so I think the mediation of the medium is kind of almost, the important thing is that we're looking and seeing with her help. Well, I just give you a quote from Ezra Pound. Great art is news that stays news. And I think because she attends and because she listens, it's going to be relevant in a way that films that offer you great, incredibly strong, powerful, imposed points of view are kind of going to they fade. But people who listen, I think, are timeless, and she can do that.
And I think to add what you say, when you say she listens, in a way she talks about, you feel the history, she says a lot, she looks at the world, and also the cruelty, la cruauté of the world. But all the time there's a moment where it's as if she finds a face and she looks at that face, and so she gives back the right to that face to exist, and she does it in a way that is so the intimacy. And I go back to this moment of where she talks about this woman, and she describes that she was smoking a cigarette, she stopped smoking, she put her coat, she went out forever, and her son was looking for her. Suddenly you know everything about some minutes of life of somebody. And I think everybody feels that suddenly she gives back to what was taken away, to all those people who were killed, who were waiting in lines, who are starving, and suddenly she sees somebody. It's the thing of Levinas. When you see somebody, you're already here. You won't kill. That's what she says all the time, in her way. I would say that this is what makes Chantal forever, because always those voices will be killed, and somebody like Chantal says, I saw you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very nice note to round up on. And we urge everybody here to go and see, do a lucky dip, take a punt on a film that you haven't, heard of or seen before. You won't be disappointed. And yes, thank you very much to all of the panelists for joining us tonight.
Thank you.